what I'd like to do is, I think I want to start with Wilfried. So Wilfried is not an academic. Wilfried runs something called Innovating Justice. And it was discovered a year and a half ago by our own Professor Garrison at a conference in The Hague, in which she was sort of very impressed by the projects that Wilfried and Innovating Justice had brought to The Hague. And these were all essentially platforms designed to use innovative tools to improve the law and legal process. You may want to restate what it is that Innovating Justice does, but that's the read I get from it. In any case, Wilfried, I was wondering if you could sort of frame what you've been doing the past few years, the evolution you've seen among lawyers and technologists, and the way lawyers may have been embracing innovation, maybe not historically, but are they starting to embrace innovation now? Are we seeing a good, positive, upward trajectory in the role of lawyers in an innovative world?
Thank you, Jonathan, and good morning, everyone. I'm Wilfried Wever. I'm here from The Hague. So we're looking globally at interesting ventures, interesting innovations in the justice domain. So that is things that improve dispute management, rulemaking, accountability, drafting of contracts. These are all examples of justice innovations for us. And to me, one of the first, so we have quite a global, very international perspective, let's say. The first thing that strikes us is that still if you Google justice entrepreneurship or justice incubation or justice accelerator programs, you don't find much. You find almost nothing compared to if you Google clean tech or health sector incubation, then you find millions of programs and millions of support programs. So, and that is still surprising. Does it mean that peaceful, stable, constructive relations between human beings is not so important? Do people not want to pay for that? So what's going on there? So that's one thing that we still notice. There is now gradually and finally new investment vehicles coming up that also support public initiatives or non-profit initiatives, like the social impact bonds that is coming up. So there is new interesting investment mechanisms for things that improve public goods. And that's a new evolution that we very much welcome, because some of the justice innovations are for-profit, silicon-based, IT tech-driven. Some of them are non-profit, more public initiatives. In the research of Hill and also in our own experiences, etc., we see and we can make the case that innovations and entrepreneurship is happening. So, because there's still many people who say justice or rule of law or is conservative, there is almost nothing happening, there is no potential in this space. But we, for example, we have been running a program mapping innovations yearly, and we've built a machine, let's say, that finds 50 innovations per year and publishes them. So we see that there's enough happening, but there's quite some isolated individuals still, or there is no well-functioning specialized ecosystems yet. So some of the examples of innovations that we see are either tools that from within eBay, you have your good is not delivered in an e-commerce website. How do you solve this issue online? And then there's low-cost mechanisms to solve that dispute. Or initiatives in Africa where they start teaching the prisoners to become paralegals. So also very low-tech initiatives that have a lot of promise and a lot of potential internationally. So we find these innovations yearly. We run a prize, we run an award around it, and we connect people around these innovations, and we're building currently the components that will make this into a more effective accelerator. So we're looking at how can we connect more of these innovators to investments and investors, and where are the specialized incubators, where are the specialized investors, where are the ecosystems where there is some traction. In recent years, and we see some of the pieces of the puzzle coming together. So gradually we feel that we're at the point of justice innovation ecosystems to come into existence, like you have in the health and in the tech sector. And I'm also here because the US is one of the places where you have a lot of the elements in place. You have bottom-up entrepreneurship, investors, you have law schools coming in, playing their part, you have entrepreneurs, you have on AngelList about 100 law or justice-related, legal information-related initiatives. So you have the elements in place, and you also have some actors here and top-down government interest to support entrepreneurship, innovation, and the presence of partners like the World Bank, etc., who also want to push this. So, and in London there is also some room. The legal hackathons is something we find very interesting, because this is where lawyers come together with IT people and start building things. So we see that, and we also we're looking from The Hague at other locations where this is starting to happen. So you have Nairobi in Kenya, you have Jakarta, Singapore is also really forward-looking with their strategies. So there is things happening, and there's interest both from bottom-up as well as from players. I was in Washington recently, and there is, the World Bank. You have several ministries looking at, okay, we have our entrepreneurship support programs, we have our IT support programs, but we don't have yet the connection with justice and rule of law, and now they're finally coming to the conclusion that maybe this could be a good idea, let's say. So that's something we very much support. My role here is to, in any case, I want to make the statement that because the US is quite well placed to make innovations in this space, that, and if you're a law student or if you're coming from a legal background, I think then your core competence is also your own profession or your own industry. So do consider disrupting or changing your own industry also, because there is a lot of potential there. And also be aware that some of the things happening here, they have international or global interest, because there is still plenty of room for first movers in this area that can really have a global impact or have an impact in other areas. If you're not doing that, then it will happen from Nairobi or for some other places. So those are the two things I want to say. And
so, Wilfried, that's great. So it may happen in Nairobi. Of the projects that you see coming through the door at Innovating Justice, can you give us sort of a rough sense of where they break down geographically? How many are coming from Africa, US?
We do our best to have a good geographic spread. So, but quite a bit are coming from the US. Canada is now also pushing to look more. They want to organize a national prize, etc. So we will have more from Canada also coming in. But we have, I think the region where we had most difficulties right now to find innovations is more Asia, because they're less easy to track down, let's say. But in Africa, there's quite a bit happening with SMS-based legal information mechanisms, or because African region is an example where if you fix the rule of law issue there, the economic market or the investment opportunities there are so vast that there is a large interest. So for us, Asia was slightly more difficult to find. It doesn't mean it's not happening, but for us also, we don't yet have local innovating justice hubs that help us with local scouting, and that's what we're working on right now.
And of the projects you see, do you have a gauge for what percentage might be coming from specifically lawyers?
We had a track on human rights innovations, and there's quite a lot of lawyers. So if it's really close to rights, let's say, but in some of the other tracks, let's say lawyers, and I'll also try to be a bit provocatively now, but we know that they suck at mathematics and numbers and engineering or product thinking. So very often it's people from those areas who take the initiative when it comes to disruptive innovations. So the lawyers are disappointing us still.
Interesting. Okay, so, and I want to throw this question out to Esther and Tony, and one of you can then tell us about your experiences. When I first started teaching, I think about 95% of my students, because I teach tech, telecom, internet-related, issues, 95% of my students, I think, had science backgrounds. Engineering degrees, BS degrees, coming out of engineering work. They made great students. And for me, I was concerned because the law school population was probably 90% humanities and social science undergrads coming to law school. So I wasn't reaching out to that other community besides the hardcore techies. Now I think 7 years later, I think about 80% of my students come from the social sciences and the humanities, because I think now there's a recognition among those students that even if they don't know technology as well as their engineering counterparts, they need to at least understand the language, the terminology, and how to represent those sorts of clients going forward. So they need to know something. So for me, it's been an interesting learning curve to see how they've evolved and grown, the humanities and social science students, to try to embrace that. So maybe that's a good segue into, I don't know if Esther or Tony wants to go next and talk about maybe Esther, you want to start with your program and what you do and what you've seen over the years, how long you've been teaching, and has there been an evolution among the sort of the psyche of your students?
Sure, thank you. And I agree, I feel some pressure to be confrontational or provocative, but I agree with a lot of what you said and what you said as well. And I share your excitement that the entrepreneurial community everywhere in Brooklyn and Chicago, Kansas City, Europe, exploding. And I'm happy to share that at Northwestern, and I think at a lot of other law schools, the law students are excited about that and taking advantage of tremendous opportunities that this explosion or boom in the entrepreneurial community is presenting to both law students and lawyers. I've been at Northwestern in our Entrepreneurship Law Center for 10 years. I practiced before that. And I have seen a change mostly because of the opportunities that I think are present for our students. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we value experiential learning as a tool to provide our law students with real-world experiences that prepare them to be excellent transactional lawyers when they graduate. And that's something that we spend a lot of time thinking about. What can our law students do while they're still in school to get really good, we call it experiential learning, or just real-world experiences to make them good lawyers, whether they're going to represent, like the dean said, big companies, new ventures within big companies, or entrepreneurs, whether they're for-profit or social entrepreneurs. And we've been doing this for a while. So we have a clinic, the Entrepreneurship Law Center, where we represent startups. And within the clinic, our students get a chance to work with entrepreneurs and do all sorts of real-world tasks that lawyers do for their clients, like helping them set up an entity, figuring out what's the right entity, protecting intellectual property, drafting contracts, and now in today's world, one of the most important tasks is a website review, making sure their policies are compliant and don't create additional liability for the companies. Why this explosion in the entrepreneurial community outside of the law school is so terrific for us as educators and for our law students and for lawyers in our community is because there's all these new opportunities. There's all these new companies that need lawyers and need legal representation. Jonathan was talking about at the hackathons, how at the end they come in, but those last 2 hours are probably two of the most valuable hours for the participants who are creating new ventures. And we are actively involved in the community in Chicago. We spend a lot of time developing relationships. There's, as we all know, lots of new shared workspaces, incubators, accelerator programs, and they're all creating new businesses. And for law students and lawyers, those are all new clients. So we're trying to figure out, and I think successfully figuring out, how we can be partners with those organizations, because they not only provide us with projects to work on from a legal perspective, like some of the projects I was mentioning, but they also give our students other opportunities to develop skills that you need in the real world as a lawyer, such as networking. We go to events like you were mentioning, the hackathons. There's all sorts of events at these entrepreneurial places where we can meet the entrepreneurs and our students can learn how to build relationships, things you need to be able to do in the real world when you graduate. We conduct workshops on legal issues, and again, are just sort of building our toolkit for our students of the skills that they're going to need to be transactional lawyers when they graduate. One frustration that we probably all feel, all of us in the clinical world, is that we can't reach enough students. So this experiential learning is terrific, but we have 16 students about a semester, and there's a lot more students that need this experience. So we've also spent a lot of time thinking about ways we can reach more students. One way is that we have a simulated course where we try to mimic the experiences the students have within the clinic with a hypothetical client. And we're able to teach triple the number of students in our seminar course, Entrepreneurship Law. And they get to do a lot of the projects that our clinic students do, but they do it for hypothetical clients. So they get very good training, but they're not working with a real client. They're working with a client that we make up and work with for the semester. Still not necessarily reaching enough students. So another tool that we're very excited about that we've been experimenting with, and I think fits in nicely to some of this conversation, where you're saying, you mentioned technology, we need to embrace it. Someone's going to disrupt whatever's happening, and first movers are going to be able to take advantage of that opportunity. And we have seen that in education. One thing that we think is going to be a big part of education going forward is online learning. And we were able to, do you guys know what a MOOC is? How many people here have heard of MOOC? So massive open online course. We did ours through Coursera. There are other platforms. And we had 35,000 students take our Entrepreneurship Law class in the fall. It was actually, it was not for lawyers, it was for entrepreneurs, but we were able to reach 35,000 students and talk to them and teach them about legal issues for entrepreneurs. So we're excited about the opportunity that technology and online learning is going to provide going forward. Your dean mentioned, and I think you mentioned also, Jonathan, we don't know what the future looks like. And nobody does in any aspect. We don't know what the future of education looks like precisely, but we're betting that part of that future picture involves distance learning, and we're excited that the distance learning breaks down some of the barriers that traditional education has in terms of geographic and, as the dean was mentioning, economic. You can reach more students for free or a much lower price. The last thing I wanted to mention that I think comes up with what both of you said in terms of law students learning how to speak the language of other students. And whatever your background, whether it's engineering or science or humanities, whatever it is, you have to be able to work with people from different disciplines when you're out of school. And you should learn how to do that while you're in school. And it is sometimes a different vocabulary or a different language. And one of the things that I'm really excited about that we've been doing for a while at Northwestern is interdisciplinary education, and I know Tony's going to talk about that more. We have a course where the law students, the engineering students, the medical students, and the business students all come together, work on teams, interdisciplinary teams, and create in different classes. It's a different business, and the one I was involved in, it's a medical innovation, so some sort of medical device, and they spend the whole year creating this device. So they follow doctors around at the beginning of the year. They come up with an idea that the medical students need to vet and confirm. The engineering students build a prototype. The law students work on the intellectual property and the corporate setup. And the business students work on the marketing plan and the business model. But they have to all work together. They have to be collaborative, and they have to learn how to communicate with each other. And that skill in and of itself, whether or not a business comes out of the class, which I'm happy to report, several successful businesses have come out of these courses, which is exciting. But that aside, the success is that they learn how to work with each other and talk to each other and collaborate, which I think is a really important skill for the students from all of the different disciplines. So again, something that I think education going forward will need to have as a fundamental principle.
Thanks, Esther. Now, I think what you've described is, I know you were one of the pioneers in building out this model within your own school. I think we've seen over the course of the past 3 or 4 years an explosion in this model, a move towards more experiential training in the transactional realm. And maybe that's a good handoff to Tony, who's been at the core of building out these networks and interfacing with other schools.
With several other people,
Yeah.
including Esther and Tom Morsh at the Northwestern University Law School. No, I think the segue is perfect. I'm Tony Luppino. I am a professor at the law school at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, but also a teaching fellow with the cross-campus Rainier Institute for Entrepreneurship and Innovation, which is very much an interdisciplinary proposition. So I have an outline, I think, that you can, if you want to access it, you can find it online. We can circulate it later. We didn't want to use too much paper. But my themes are interdisciplinary approaches and the importance of networks, which have helped us along and many, many other schools across this country. And we're now delighted that Jonathan's got us in a position where we're reaching across the ocean. He's right, the way this, I use the same exact expression, we're turning this into lemonade. When I called him to say, hey, heads up, your article kind of does a disservice to a network that already exists, and he was very gracious about it, and we shared information, which led him to say, what we need is a network of networks, which is exactly right. So that'll be largely what I'm going to talk about. I'll give you a brief rundown on what we've been doing at UMKC, but you can read more about that. We're completely open source on syllabi and course materials, everything. So I'd be happy to share with everybody. But I've been involved, and several others at UMKC, with interdisciplinary entrepreneurship initiatives since 2002, really. We started our Entrepreneurial Legal Services Clinic, which serves community entrepreneurs who can't afford legal services, and including students, and I'll come back to the student ventures in a minute. Since then, in 2004, we developed formally an entrepreneurial lawyering program, dubbed that, with two prongs, to better train our students to become effective counselors to entrepreneurs, and to teach them to be entrepreneurial in their practice of law, which increasingly means embracing technology. And we were just at a conference yesterday, and I'll mention another one coming up that hit that point. In general, here's what we have. At UMKC, we have about 8 courses that are specifically directed toward advising entrepreneurs, several of which have interdisciplinary elements. One of them, we're in the 9th year of teaching entrepreneurship and new venture creation, which is law, business, and engineering students with law, business, and engineering faculty in the same room, working in teams on business plans for startup ventures, which then get entered into a competition at the end of the semester. The interesting thing in terms of networking and collaboration is that the projects come some from students from all across the campus, but some from our University Technology Transfer Office, some from University Technology Transfer Offices at another university, the University of Kansas. We have one this year from a hospital research organization. And as everybody said, learning the approaches to problem solving and just the jargon of all these different disciplines is a huge benefit in itself. And so our students have enjoyed that course very much. It's been productive. It has produced some interesting ventures. This year we added to that a social venture creation course, same kind of concept, law faculty and law students working with people from the Midwest Center for Nonprofit Leadership in our business school, which is the Henry W. Block School of Management. Henry, by the way, is the H in H&R Block, the famous Kansas City entrepreneur who started a very modest business that grew into the public company H&R Block, and the story is fascinating. He's in his 90s. He still comes and works with the entrepreneurship students on the campus. So we've had these programs for some time. We have internships where we send law students to technology transfer offices so they can see the process of scientist on a university campus makes an invention disclosure. Somebody has to decide, are we going to try to commercialize that, and so on. So it's kind of, and there's other elements to the program. I don't want to dwell too much on our programs because I'm more interested in talking about the networks that have developed. Many of this has been, the networks that have been created have been facilitated by the Ewing, Marion, Kauffman Foundation in Kansas City. How many have heard of the Kauffman Foundation? Several people have, okay. Mr. Kauffman was another Kansas City entrepreneur, completely dedicated to entrepreneurship, and his foundation supports entrepreneurship globally. Well, one of the things they did was they helped several of the law school transactional clinics, entrepreneurship, community economic development, intellectual property clinics get started. When we started ours in 2002, I want to say there were about 15 of them. The one that Esther now directs was started by Tom Morrish at Northwestern. It was one of the first ones. It was pretty apparent that we could do more to get the word around, to connect these clinics, and really Tom and others worked together to develop a network which now has 150 or so of these clinics. There are 200 U.S. law schools approximately, a little bit more than that. There are 150 clinics. Now some law schools have more than one. They've been connected. They're about to have their 13th annual conference in Chicago in April, later later this month. The Kauffman Foundation started, and we launched, I think, in 2009. Esther's one of the editors. I am the lead editor, and there are 4 or 5 other folks from across the country. They have an entrepreneurship law website. If you Google entrepreneurship law and Kauffman Foundation, you'll find it. It has a wealth of resources on law school curriculum, business school curriculum, running a transactional clinic, conducting for-profit, nonprofit transactions, social enterprise, resource links for entrepreneurs and educators. And there's a list of all these clinics state by state, for example. And there's a listserv that goes with it, which again, I give credit to Esther's mentor, Tom Morse, who started what was called the Law Biz listserv at Northwestern, allowed the Kauffman Foundation to take it over. It's now called the EshipLaw listserv. These clinics have communicated for years now through this with all kinds of constructive questions about, have you encountered this? What do you do about this? And really, many clinics we know from going to other conferences got started by looking at some of the information, the forms, the engagement letters, the procedure manuals for the clinics, which is, I think, largely led to having 150 of them now. So I think I recommend that you look at the Entrepreneurship Law website, and educators can subscribe to it for free, and there are some publicly accessible sections on it too. But other networks that have helped in this cause include USASB, the United States Association for Small Business and Entrepreneurship, which is really a leading organization of entrepreneurship educators across campuses. And they have special interest groups such as technology and entrepreneurship in the arts, social entrepreneurship, international entrepreneurship. And a few years ago, we started one called Law and Entrepreneurship, and it's a special interest group that you can join. USASB is a terrific organization. It's helping us promote, among other things, service from lawyers and law students to entrepreneurs across the country. So just one example of that, which we found to be, we think, an easily replicable procedure that we followed. We work with our business school's cross-campus entrepreneurship program, which has a very aggressive student ventures program. It's called the eScholars program. They took in, I think, 150 applications this year, admitted about 70 to this year-long mentoring. Really, it's in the nature of an accelerator. Usually about half of them pass the test and get launched. Our clinic started representing students in that, and just as Esther said, we can't have too many students in the clinic, so the volume was overrunning us. So we thought, well, when I was in practice as a business and tax planning lawyer, I wanted to do pro bono work, but the work I'd get would be not things that I was accustomed to. It'd be juvenile criminal appointments, things where I had to go then get help from people who knew it. So we contacted about 30 local lawyers who were business, tax, intellectual property lawyers and said, look, would you be willing to handle one student venture a semester, maybe one a year or one a semester? Asked 30 people, 27 yeses. So now we have a panel of 27 lawyers who are helping students and loving it because it's work right up their alley. It's what they do every day. And so we think that can be leveraged with the clinics across the country. There are other organizations that help the cause. There's the Academy of Legal Studies and Business, which are folks teaching business law in business schools. There's the Global Consortium of Entrepreneurship Centers. All these things are linked in my outline. Same kind of goal of getting this to be an interdisciplinary proposition. It has to be. Entrepreneurship, by definition, is interdisciplinary. The other part of it that we're trying to do that really gets back to Wilfried's comments is many law schools are firmly committed to access to justice, and so one of the things we're finding in the U.S. is there are huge underserved populations of low and moderate income folks who can't afford legal fees. And more law schools are starting incubator programs for their graduates, for new lawyers who are being trained in how to deliver legal services, but with a large focus on serving communities that can't otherwise afford the services. We were at a conference at the Toro College of Law in Islip, not far from here, yesterday, where that was the whole theme. And part of that was embracing technology to make the delivery of legal services much more efficient, which will bring me, I don't want to take up too much time, so I'll bring me to the last point, which Jonathan knows about, and so does Patrick. In collaboration with the Kauffman Foundation, which is providing support to us to do this, we're hosting at the University of Missouri, Kansas City this summer really a law tech conference that has three themes. It's how can technology be used to better match up consumers of legal services with qualified lawyers? How can technology be used to make the operation of a law firm practice more efficient? And how can it be used to actually make the delivery of the legal services more efficient, the document production, the research? And so we found, as is often the case when you're trying to put together a network, that there are pockets of terrific activity all over the place. And you hear about this, and you go to a conference, and there's neat stuff. But until they start to coordinate the way the transactional clinics network coordinated, you don't get the impact. So we're inviting, and the grant allows us to pay for folks to make the trip, reasonable travel expenses. People working in different spaces at intersections of law and technology to have, very much like Jonathan envisions here today, not just a let us tell you what we're doing, but let's work together to try to create a bigger network and to have more impact and to share information and share technology. And the sharing is the key part of it. So most of our success, Esther's, mine, other people in this network have been from, as again, just sort of open source sharing. We're delighted that iLink will be represented, and Jonathan will be there, and iLink either in person or electronically in Kansas City in July, because this very much needs to be an international proposition too.
All right, well, that's a great segue to Patrick, actually. Patrick's been a lawyer in America. He's been a lawyer in England, and he is working with Queen Mary, University of London, on the launch of their entrepreneurial clinical experience, and a member of the iLink network. So, Patrick, maybe you could tell us, and maybe I insulted you. Maybe I said Europe is behind the curve, has been historically behind the curve in experiential education, and is not training the same quality of entrepreneurial lawyers as America.
Yeah, I think I'll come back to that. But firstly, thank you very much for inviting me here to speak, Jonathan, and for Brooklyn Law School for hosting the event. It's absolutely fantastic to be part of this today. Well, Jonathan introduced me. My name is Patrick Cahill. I'm from Queen Mary, University of London. And I run the qLegal project, which provides legal advice to tech startups and entrepreneurs in East London. I thought I'd just kind of introduce what's happening in the UK firstly, because I'm sure you're all very aware of what's happening in the US, but Europe is moving towards a similar model of providing advice to tech startups and entrepreneurs in Europe. So I'll just briefly introduce entrepreneurship clinics in the UK. There aren't very many of them, is really the overview. But there is a development towards more clinics opening at universities, which will provide support to tech startups. Then I'll just talk about Queen Mary's response to London as a tech city. And I'll move on to explain a bit more about the iLink network, which has already been mentioned. So I'll just introduce some of the clinics that are currently operating in the UK at universities. And a lot of these clinics, I have to say, and reflecting Esther's point, do not have kind of assessment methods in place. They're usually extracurricular, which is different to the US model. So we work quite a lot in the UK with external counsel and the provision of legal advice, which I think is quite different to the approaches here in the US. And I think that's something that we'll be able to talk a bit more about later on. I'll just kind of run through these really quickly. There aren't very many of them. The first is University of South Wales, which provides small businesses and social enterprises with legal advice. The second is Northumbria, which is based in Newcastle in the northeast of England. This university operates almost like a law firm. It employs attorneys, solicitors who provide advice through student advisors. And they don't necessarily target startups and entrepreneurs because there aren't really that many startups and entrepreneurs in Newcastle, where the university is based. So at the moment, what we're looking to do with Northumbria is to look at how the boom of tech city in London can assist them in their client uptick. Coming to London, there's basically only two universities which are providing advice to tech startups. One is City University, And this model of advice delivery is by attorneys delivering the advice with students kind of note-taking and supervising their work. It's a drop-in model, so people can just kind of turn up to the meetup and get face-to-face advice. A project we run at Queen Mary University, Law for the Arts, provides business advice, and the university itself has a legal advice centre which has been established in 2006, which usually provides advice to individuals in family, criminal, housing, landlord and tenant matters. So it's had a real kind of justice focus. And the qLegal project, which has recently just been launched in January, is a move away, I guess, to supplement the services that are already provided at the university. So qLegal essentially is in response to London becoming a tech city. So in the past decade, there's been so much inward investment and government support to encourage businesses into the east of London, to encourage them to set up offices, a lot of co-working spaces. There's a lot of incubators. Google have recently opened up Google Campus, which provides free space for tech startups and entrepreneurs to work. There's a lot of support from government agencies. There's a lot of funding available for technology startups. So in response to this movement in London, the university decided that we should provide some sort of legal provision in order to respond to the boom in East London, in Tech City. So I'll just talk a bit about qLegal. It's provided by postgraduate students at the Centre for Commercial Law Studies. So students work on cases in pairs, and they work in a number of ways. They advise clients directly, so they interview clients and will provide written advice 21 days after the interview. And they work with external lawyers. So we work with in-house counsel from Intel, from Unisys, from Google, but we also work with kind of large international law firms and also high street practices, which I think is a bit different to the way most US law schools operate their legal clinics. And I'd be interested to talk a bit more about that. We also go into the community, so we work with a number of organizations, both government and private. So we work with School for Startups, which is an organization which provides finance to people with ideas that want to take those ideas further. So our students actually go in to those organizations and provide legal advice in a workshop format. Some of our students also draft toolkits for our website. So this allows them to go away and research a particular legal issue, such as kind of business structure, confidentiality, licensing. And these are uploaded to our website. So when clients contact us to get free legal advice, we will often kind of tell them to go to our website to check out the toolkits before we actually would provide that face-to-face advice. Because we work with a number of professionals, they also provide talks on different areas of law, and these are also hosted by the university. So it's been mentioned already, but qLegal is part of iLink, and the idea behind iLink is to create a network within Europe to support and encourage innovation and to encourage entrepreneurship in Europe. And one way that iLink can do this is through the provision of free legal advice. So what we're doing with iLink is supporting and developing best practice at different universities within Europe. So we have a number of universities involved in the network so far. The founding members of the iLink network are Queen Mary University, Amsterdam, Leuven and Hamburg. And we're very thankful to work with Jonathan at Brooklyn in developing this European network. At the moment, what we're particularly looking at is how students are assessed within clinic at universities. I know that the United States is way ahead in terms of its assessment methods, and in Europe, we're still looking at different models of how students are assessed. We're also looking at the different models of how students participate within legal clinic, and also how startups access legal advice. There's not really one fit of how students or how startups access legal advice, but we're going to look at different models of how they do and come to a conclusion on what works and what doesn't work. So we'll be happy to share that with anyone who's interested. And with that, we're looking at the legal challenges which startups face. One example in Europe is immigration law. We're finding that actually in Europe, there's startups are finding it very difficult to get employees into London, to get employees into the UK. So we'll be looking at the legal challenges in Europe and how those can be overcome. And we'll be writing a policy paper which we will present to government after that. So that's kind of an introduction to what we're doing in Europe. I'd be really great to kind of hear more about what you're doing in the US in terms of assessment particularly, and also what the legal challenges of startups here in the US are and how you're meeting that demand within kind of a university setting.
Thanks, Patrick. So frankly, it's my hope that this becomes just the tipping point for a much bigger conversation between all of us in America and all of us in Europe to build something so we can learn from each other. Now, my first question, and maybe have to be my last question, we're running short on time, is we all have, it seems, a unified mission in training the next generation of lawyers to think more like entrepreneurs, to better represent entrepreneurs, to be more innovative in their practices. How do we assess that? Have we made any progress? If we haven't made as much progress as we'd like to, what are the steps we should be taking to make sure that this next generation of lawyers better represent entrepreneurs and think more entrepreneurially and innovatively?
Well, assessing what how many ventures are being created, whether people like their lawyers.
Well, maybe whether or not people are scared of their lawyers anymore.
Yeah.
It used to be we were the necessary evil, we were the roadblock.
I'll tell you, it's exactly right. I mean, when I got started in some of the interdisciplinary stuff through a Kauffman Foundation program where they took 11 faculty from different disciplines, from 4 universities, to design interdisciplinary courses. I went to the very first meeting, and several of the people, it was pretty clear they were saying, who invited the lawyer to the entrepreneurship party? And I tell my students that all the time, so they have to add value. I think a lot of us across the country are making impact in explaining to the students that you have to show that you're bringing something to the table here, that you're saying can do and not can't do all the time. Now, obviously, you have to tell people where the lines are and you have to comply with the law, but you have to have solutions and other ways to get to their objectives. So I think we're having an impact. How to measure it, I'm not sure. We can measure how many clinics there are. That's gone up 10 times in the last 10 years or so. But in terms of how many, whether the culture is shifting, we think so, but I can't say that I have an accurate measurement of it.
I can just give one anecdotal piece of evidence that I have from our experiences in Chicago that the entrepreneurial community, at least, is much more embracing of lawyers. A few years ago, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, when I would go to organizations and say, don't forget to involve the law students. We want to be part of your programming. Let us be on your panels. Let us come to your events. They'd say, okay, fine. We'll save you a few spots, and they'd let us come. And we would have the same conversation with our students. Remember, you have to add value. Talk to them about their business ideas. Give them suggestions that are helpful. And over time, I think that's really done a 180. And I think now, oftentimes, the law schools are the first, maybe not the first, maybe that's too lofty, but we're included. And when people have conferences, hackathons, or events, the law students and the law schools are right on the invitation list, and they're excited to have us. And our law students report back to us that when they go to these networking events or other activities that are happening, they're not standing against the wall trying to get into a conversation. When they say, oh, I'm a law student or I'm a recent alum from a law school, people say, oh my God, I'm so glad I met you. Let me talk to you. And then, by the way, would you mind talking to 7 other people that I'm friends with that are dying to talk to a law student or a lawyer about some issues that we're having? So we're just seeing more and more that we're included in the conversations and we're valued in these conversations. And entrepreneurs, want to have us at their events. They want to have us on their teams. We're seeing more and more business startups where there's a spot held for someone that has either their JD, their JD MBA, went to law school, is in law school. So we're feeling more included in those conversations in those events.
And I just wanted to underline, as I said earlier, I think it's important to get the law students involved on the front end. If they're actually seeing the business plan develop from ideation to developing the product to pricing to marketing, instead of coming in kind of later and saying, oh, you have some legal issues.
Exactly.
If you see the context, it's so much more helpful.
Yeah,
Agree
and I mean at
100%.
Queen Mary as well, our students are involved in not just legal drafting and research, but also they get trained in marketing as well. So they're out at those events and they really enjoy networking with kind of young, energetic, really enthusiastic innovators and inventors and people with ideas. And the feedback that we get from students at Queen Mary is that they love talking to them and finding out what their legal issues are, even though they might not necessarily understand them and know how to respond. They can do that later, but they're opening up that opening up basically the avenue for communication, and they really understand, I think, that we are providing a service and it needs to be a good service. So I think when they actually acquire those clients, that they understand that more and it becomes almost personal to them.
Can we get a reality check from the, this is actually, maybe you're the right one to do this. A reality check from the audience and then a verification from Wilfried maybe, or you can go wherever you want. But those of you who are not lawyers in the audience, do you look at the lawyer today as the necessary evil, the last resort, or is it someone you try to incorporate into your business processes?
I love working with my lawyers, and they're really helpful, but I find that that's extremely unusual. I almost became a law student. What I find with most of my colleagues, especially more technical people who are running startups who are less business-oriented, is they really don't want to talk to their lawyers or think about trademark law or think about these necessary things.
So it's still incumbent upon us to prove to the world that lawyers play a vital role. And I didn't mean to interrupt you, Wilfried. Share your insights.
Yeah, I'm still a bit concerned that there is a lot of progress being made on lawyers giving legal advice to entrepreneurs. So I see that happening. But if you look at some of the institutions of law and justice, whether it's the courts or the Congress or Parliament, they are still very much the same as 200 years ago. And this is starting to be a problem. So there is people around the world starting to question, does democracy still work? Because we have mobile phones, we have everything, but we can't connect mobily to the Congress or whatever. And this is starting to be a risk for society in some places around the world. So I don't see the lawyers yet stepping up and changing their own profession or their own institutions. And that's a difference between giving advice to entrepreneurs or taking the entrepreneurial role in your own domain.
So I see two scary characters in the middle and the back. In fact, they are not lawyers, but they are very disruptive. And they're going to speak a little bit later. And this is, I think, gets to Wilfried's point. We've got two technologists in the back of the room who started something called Docracy. They'll speak a little bit about what they built with Docracy. But to me, when I first spoke to them maybe 4 years ago now, I was scared to death by what they were doing. They're building a platform that essentially disintermediates lawyers. So the crowd can build contracts. And I thought, doesn't this destroy the profession? Are we now going to be disrupted the same way music was disrupted and video was disrupted and brokerage offices were disrupted, travel agents? Are these guys doing to us what their predecessors had done to the other service sectors? But I thought it was best for us to embrace them because this is inevitable. We'll hear from them a little bit later, but I think the issue that we've got to deal with is, are we dinosaurs? Is it like the Matrix? We're dead already, we just don't know it. Are we the dinosaurs, or how do we evolve to play this role? Every single business is built on perpetual beta, ability to pivot, moving quickly at the speed of light, not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. Lawyers are almost the opposite. We are ethically bound, professionally bound to be thoughtful, methodical, careful. And that means can we work as quickly as our clients? And how do we train the next generation to work that quickly so that we're a value add? I used to represent a company called Free World Dial-Up. No one's ever heard of Free World Dial-Up except my students. Free World Dial-Up was Skype before Skype was Skype. But they had a lawyer who put the reins on them, me. And in the process of the year it took for me to get federal clearances to let Free World Dial-Up do what it wanted to do, Skype did what Free World Dial-Up wanted to do. So for me, it's a lesson learned that I can't necessarily always be the yeah but lawyer. There has to be a role for the lawyer to pave the way so their client can get there fast and first.
I think a lot of us think technology is going to be part of the answer to that. I mean, a lot of things I used to do with questions and answers with clients where I was on the clock hourly can be done much more efficiently with technology if we really develop it in a sophisticated way. So it's one of the reasons we're having the conference in Kansas City is to figure. I was kind of a tech dinosaur. I confessed yesterday at a conference that when they first gave me a computer in the law firm I was at 15 years ago, I used the monitor for Post-it notes. And then I learned how to use it. Then a client took me aside and said, Tony, here's the deal. Technology happens with you or to you. So you got to get with it, and the profession has to understand that, and that'll, I think, make us more effective.
Both Tony and Esther said 2 dirty words. Well, Tony said a dirty phrase. Esther said a 4-letter word. Tony said open source, which has historically been a scary concept to lawyers, proprietary issues, and that's changed. But Esther, I think, said the dirtiest word of all, at least to legal academics. She said MOOCs. She said MOOCs. MOOCs are about the most disruptive thing we could see in education, and now it's starting to penetrate into law schools. But I think there is something to it, and I think to the extent that many of us are involved in experiential education, we see the value, I think, of recognizing that there are certain things that can be done online quickly. A lot of doctrinal classes can be done effectively, but it's that hands-on training that needs to be done in the law school with trained supervisors. Is that what you imagine? Is that in your move to MOOCs? Are you imagining more of the straight substantive doctrinal courses being done online and now more of the hands-on practical work being done within the class?
I'm going to give you an answer without an answer, because I think it goes back to we really don't know what the future looks like, but we have to experiment, figure it out, embrace it, and like Tony said, don't let be part of technology, don't let it happen to you. You said it more eloquently, but we have to figure out how to use MOOCs, and I don't know exactly how what it's going to look like, but it is going to be part of all education, including legal education, and I think there's a way to use online education or distance learning to be really effective and make our system a lot more helpful, efficient, and accessible. And it's incumbent upon all of us as educators, lawyers, leaders in different areas to figure out how to do that and make sure we do it well.
All right, so I look at the 4 panelists up here as sort of one spoke in the hub of this community that we've got going today and that will build into perpetuity. So I think we've got to call it quits on this panel, but I want you to know most of these folks will be hanging around and we're going to need their insights as academics and as people who are watching legal innovation.